Chris Dimakos is on the line. Chris, let me start with the story, I guess, that's going to make news this afternoon. I don't know how up to date we can be on this, but we had our Labour Minister provincially, Jean Boulet, table a new bill today which basically gives the government power to intervene when a strike or a lockout affects services to the population, which is basically like saying they're basically acting like, I guess, union busters here, no?
Right. And well, they're trying to expand the scope. You know, when we see the police officers wearing, the pants, or where you see essential services, firemen, it's hard for them to strike because they're essential services and the population, the security of the population will be at stake. Well, what they're trying to do is expand that. Now they're saying, well, that we should have the same type of situation for environmental, for social. Let's say teachers, teachers who are on strike. If we let that go on indefinitely, well, that's going to affect the greater population. Kids won't be going to school. So what they're trying to do is expand the scope as to what is considered almost essential for society. And what they want to have the ability to do is say, hey, if you guys can't work out a deal here between the teachers and the government, well, then we're going to force you back to work, and then it's too bad for you. So is it good for the employees? Absolutely not. But if you're in that line of work, I could tell you, if you look at the trends of what's happening, not just in Quebec, but in North America and around the world, we're starting to see some of these areas of employment be susceptible to these kinds of provisions. It's becoming more and more apparent now that governments cannot risk anymore to have some of these situations escalate to the point where, and it's not just school, it can be even garbage pickup. They referenced times where cemeteries on strike, and then it just creates a really bad situation. So there's no question that is a huge hit to leverage for employees who are negotiating, because that's their top card right on the deck to be able to strike. I mean, that's no better leverage than that. But at the same time, if you're looking at it from a society's perspective, things can deteriorate pretty quickly when it comes to something like school or something like sanitation or the environment. So it's not an easy topic. There's going to be a loser here, but there's no question that it's going to come with legal challenges. That I can guarantee.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let me get to the topic to talk about today. You have a judgment. Now, this was in Ontario, but the same would apply, imagine, here, where a home builder, right, basically says, look, I'm going to put this property up for grabs. Everybody can rent, do whatever you have to do, and then pulls out, right, by virtue of a bunch of delays. So you're the builder. You decide, okay, I've had enough. I'm not going to do this, and the hell with everybody else who's already put money down to get a place in my development. What happens next?
Yeah, so this is an interesting judgment where a couple decides to buy a home for about $1 million in Ontario, and the same applies here. They have a contract with the builder. They put the first deposit down, and the builder defaults on, the progress, defaults on a whole bunch of things that they were supposed to do during this time. So what the buyers then said, well, we have to give a second deposit here. And what the buyer said was like, well, since they defaulted on all these things, we'll make the second deposit. And we know very well that we have this in our bank. Right? We know that if we want to, we can get out of this contract because there were so many breaches by the builder. Well, the house eventually gets built, and the buyers are saying, we don't want this house anymore. You defaulted on the contract in so many different ways. So the builder goes to court and says, hey, they owe me money for this house because I had to sell it at a loss, $200,000 loss. Plus. And the court said to the buyers, you know what? You owe him money, even though he broke the contract and even though he didn't fulfill his obligations. What you did was you decided to continue by putting down the second part of the deposit. So by you continuing to follow through with the contract, it's almost as if you conceded all of those rights that you had before you made that second deposit. So it's almost like the courts are saying, you can't say, well, we have this now. Let's see this through and see if it's worth it for us to take this house or not, judging on the market. And the lesson here for everyone is, if you are in a contract with a builder or with any party for that matter, your actions that you do, like what emails you write, whether it's deposits or payments, your actions can actually go against and force you to concede rights that you would have otherwise had you acted in the right way. So it's a lesson for everybody. If you're building a home, if you are in any type of service contract where there's a progression and there's delays, make sure that if something goes wrong, that you understand what your rights are at that point, because it's as simple as checking off a box or following through with the next payment, where you can concede all the rights that you would have had you sat there and said, hey, 1 second here, you didn't do this, this, and this. Well, now we got to work something out here because I've been wronged by this contract and I want to be compensated accordingly. So it's very important that you don't just follow the motions until the very end and you say, well, I'll raise this at a later time, because sometimes not raising that issue at the right time can mean you just saying, I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna move on, and it's not that important.
All right. So wait, I'm confused here, though. So let's say, though, right, that the builder in this, whether it's a home or whether it's a project, says to you, okay, look, things have changed. I need to come up with extra money, and therefore you'll have to put up another deposit. Before you go ahead and go through with that deposit, right, and you say, right, I'm giving this to you conditional upon something, would that have made a difference in this case?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you say, hey, listen, this contract right now, the one we have, it's been breached by you, okay? So now we got to figure out something else. And that might mean getting compensated for delays. That might mean making a new contract. That might mean having a penalty clause in there for future breaches. That might mean you saying, well, the price is now different because this delay is going to cost me X amount of money. We got to renegotiate. But you have to raise the issue when it comes up, because if you go along as if nothing happened and say, I know what I'll do, I'll wait till this is finished and then I'll bring it up, you run the risk of conceding all of your rights. So this is a builder who ended up getting paid damages even though he breached several provisions of the contract. So it's just a warning for everyone out there. If something goes wrong in the contract, don't sit around and just say, I'll deal with it later. Deal with it right there and then.
Yeah, and keep a record of you being, I'm making that point, right? I'm giving this to you based on something. Okay, last question, just really, really quickly, Chris. What happens in a case where, and we've had this happen, I think, here, a developer is putting up a condo project and for whatever reason, it's abandoned even though people have deposited money. Do you have recourse against that developer because the project's not done?
Huge one. It's all over the place. Yeah, in Quebec, we have what is called a new home warranty. Okay, it's almost like an insurance where up to $50,000 of your deposit is insured through these companies that manage these insurance premiums. So when you are buying a condo or an apartment in one of these high-rise buildings, make sure that the builder is insured as part of this group of builders, and there are many, that you are protected. If they go belly up, if they abandon the site, well, then you have your deposit up to $50,000 protected. And you never want to give more than that because you're not insured for the rest. You want to give up until what you're protected for, and that way, if ever the company goes bankrupt and you're left with half the building being put up, you'll get that deposit back.
All right. Always great advice. Chris, thanks so much. Appreciate it.